Alright, so this is our box. As far as what to line it with to kill the grass. Now, I'm fine with using cardboard. I prefer cardboard because it's cheap, it's quick, it's easy, and within just a couple of years, by the time it fully decomposes, at that point you're going to have weeds in your box anyway from either the wind and all other sorts of things that bring weeds in. Composting, all of that. So, I prefer to use cardboard, but there are other options for covering your boxes. If you want a completely organic garden and you're worried about what's in the cardboard, I have seen people lay something down to kill the grass and then just remove it once the grass is completely dead. With that method though, you need to make sure that the grass is completely yellow or brown without an ounce of green, because the green means the roots are still alive, and therefore you will just have the same problem just a couple weeks later. So with what to lay down, I've seen stuff that's darker will work best because it'll heat up more in the sun. You could use cardboard and then just lift it up once the grass dies. You could use like thick moving blankets. Your poor neighbors will not be too happy with seeing that. But once your garden's in and it's beautiful, they won't mind. But there's other options to kill the grass. I prefer to use cardboard. So I have my piece right here. And it pretty much fits, all except for a slight bit around the sides, which really does not bother me. I'm gonna have to do some weeding anyway. It's just the way life is. Okay, so that's in. It's pretty much compact. It'll fall down more once we get all of our ingredients in. I'll start with the peat moss, because it is the biggest in this range. Grab my trusty clippers. Just start at the top. And I forgot to add one more thing that we often add to our garden that we save from the kitchen is eggshells. We save a lot of eggshells primarily because eggshells add a lot of calcium to the soil. And if you've ever had blue minge rot on your tomatoes or peppers or anything, chances are you needed calcium, which eggshells would have provided. So now, you see how dusty this stuff is? It's beautiful, but it's dusty. I'm getting ready to cough just looking at it. Ugh. Alright, so we've got one bag emptied into there. At this point, your best friend will be your water hose. And you want to soak this down completely. I'm going to smooth it out a little bit first. But you want to soak it down completely. And you'll want to do this for a couple of days. It'd be best if it even rains on it, because it will be so fluffy. You'll go to put your plants in and you'll see it is just water, maybe ½ an inch thick, and it's all gummed up like mud on top, and then, the rest is peat. So I'm going to try to avoid that by mixing in all of our other ingredients, but still that is a significant problem with peat moss. While it adds so much fluff and so much body to soil, you've got that problem of drainage. So this looks absolutely beautiful. I'm not going to add any more peat moss until we add our other ingredients, but for now, I will wet this down really well. Now I want to show you what I mean with this, with the peat moss being fluffy, all right? So you see the water's pooling on top, and if I were to scrape underneath, it's completely dry, just a tiny bit under. See that? So that's when you get problems with peat moss. And to fix this, I'm just gonna add a bunch of sand to it. It's very fun to play with if you have little kids. I'm just gonna add a bunch of sand to it. And perlite I will add in probably tomorrow. But you do want to mix that in because otherwise it will float on top. But as you can see, peat moss, you need to make sure it's completely mixed in and it has soaked up water. I see the drainage on this box, since it is downhill for down here. This may look like a con, but it is actually good because at least I know one part of the peat moss will soak in water before the rest. But once there's plants in here and roots and everything, it should not be affected by how this is slanted downhill. You can see how much water's pooling down there versus up here at the top. But this should not be a problem. Anyway, I'm going to just keep soaking this down, and then I'm going to add some sand and some lime, and we'll go from there. Alright, so that last clip that's added there, it is partial time lapse. It got a little bit too dark for me to continue, but it's a partial time lapse of what I was doing to the soil. So just to reiterate, we have one 2.2 cubic foot bag of peat moss in here, and I added lime and sand and then wet it down again, and it has been about 2 days since that, so it's gotten some dew on it. It's definitely settled down a little bit. You can see it's not so fluffy, but it's still very soft for peat moss. I've mixed in about a quarter of this 5-gallon bucket of it, maybe about a half, and the sand has definitely helped weight it down, and it's done really well with that. I've added about 2 cups of lime, so I'm just going to keep wetting it down and adding sand and lime, and I'm going to use the pH tester just to make sure it's at the right range, and then I'll add some garden soil and some manure. Yeah. Okay, so what you just saw in that video was the pink stuff that I put in was hibiscus tea from tea bags. All of our tea bags I save and I open up and just dump them straight into the beds. And then I added some coffee, and what was in the clear cup and the red cup was coffee, like used coffee grounds, and used tea grounds. So I added that in there. Then I added a little bit more sand and about a half a bag of manure. This is a little less than half full. So that's all in here and mixed in, but the peat moss is still really, really spongy. So I don't have any perlite right now, but I'm going to go get some perlite, put it in here and mix it up really well to hopefully add some drainage. And then after the perlite, I'm going to add either some more soil or more peat moss, and then I'm going to check my pH just to make sure that it's not too acidic, just to make sure it's in the right range. And then I'll be ready to plant in here. One other quick thing I wanted to note, you can kind of see my little trenches that I've made in the soil. So these little trenches is just because our ground is sloping downhill in this location, and the little trenches just provide just that little bit so all the water and soil does not pool right there in that one area, as you can see that it is already starting to. So that's just that when I add the the water in, it doesn't just keep going. And using the water hose with the other hand, and just making sure that all of my dirt is wet. I want this to be completely soaked because peat moss dries out so quickly. And as you can see, that's fluffy there. So this is one of the easiest methods to keep your soil moist. All right, and I'll show you this corner right here. As you can see, this is so true to peat moss. The water is just pooling. And as you can see with my two little humps that I had here, the water's then going through and it's pooling there instead of all down there in the corner, which is technically what I was just trying to do. So I'm gonna just wait for that to soak in, and then I'll probably wet it down about 3 or 4 more times. And I'd prefer it to rain on this bed of soil at least once or twice before I plant in it. But I really do not have that kind of freedom because it is already getting a little bit late for my beets and carrots, and I wanted to do some of that here as well. Alright, so our box here is smoothed out, and I'm going to test multiple spots here. But the first spot I test looks really good. Just under 7, just barely at the other side of that tick. So it is pretty much right where we want it. Depending on what I want to put in this, I will adjust that accordingly. If what I have, maybe like a little bit more acidic soil, then I'll leave it as is, or maybe add a little bit more peat moss. So as for this part of it, it looks good. And it is right at 7. Water will run off too, and it looks like it's right perfect as well. Maybe just slightly. I've had a lot of butterflies in here today. I guess all this organic matter they're starting to really enjoy. All right, and then our last corner, I guess it's about at 7. Perfect. Right in the middle. Our perlite today. We have 6 bags here, and I think 1 bag per box will be enough. I bought all of what Lowe's had, so maybe they'll get some more in this week and I can go up and buy that as well. So over here, I'm not going to be planting in the Miracle Grow. We try to go organic gardening, so since that already has fertilizer in it, we're gonna just put that in the other boxes for my flowers this spring and summer. But this garden soil here, we're just gonna top these boxes off, put it in both of these. This one could use a little bit more sand, but my bucket was empty, so therefore I'm just gonna put a little bit more perlite in this one, whereas in this one, I loaded it pretty full of sand. I don't know if you can see. It's just a very sandy mix. Yeah, just to me this looks beautiful. But you can see it definitely has a lot of sand in it. And I did that on purpose. Also because I did not have perlite at the time of, I just decided to add more sand so the soil can be resting and I can make sure that it does not, it's not just, freshly mixed when I put my beets and carrots in. So over here, I'm just gonna mix in a little bit more of this soil and some perlite, and we'll call it good. One more thing on the perlite, when you mix it in, ideally you should have mixed it in right at the first layer of peat moss. When you mixed in the lime and the sand at first, you really should have mixed it in there, because the perlite has a tendency to rise to the top of the box and then just sit on top, and that really does not help drainage at all. So I should have mixed it in earlier, but I'll make sure I just put it in at an earlier step in these boxes, and the next boxes versus what I did with these. Dirty hands. So guys, thanks for watching. I hope that you've learned something from this video. I definitely learned a lot trying to make it, and just learning about soil and what's going in it. Now, a lot of people, instead of adding any 10-10-10 fertilizer or any sort of that kind of thing, they add worm castings, which is a good idea. I mean, it's great. It does a lot for the garden. However, instead of that, I added just probably maybe 1/4 cup of 10-10-10 fertilizer, mixed it in here really well, and I'm going to go down to our, forest woods-like area, and I'm going to dig up a bunch of worms and add them to the garden just to make sure that I have worms in here and they're really tilling it up and doing a good job with it. I want to show you a close-up of this soil real quick. Just, this stuff is beautiful. Is that in focus? Hope y'all can see that, but it is absolutely beautiful. We've got our perlite, our sand, our soil, and our peat moss. It is soft and fluffy, and I cannot wait to plant in it. I also have the eggshells and coffee. Now, if you don't want to add eggshells to your soil, the other thing you can do to increase the calcium is if you make boiled eggs, then use the water that you boiled the eggs in as a natural calcium additive, I guess. I always do that whenever I make boiled eggs, and it seems to really help the soil. And our tomatoes had bloom and rot this year, BER. And that's when the bottom of the tomato, or squash and zucchini gets it too. It just starts rotting from the bloom and forward. And we had that really badly this year, and that is primarily a calcium deficiency. And I dissolved some Tums in water. I dissolved it in warm water and then added it to my pitcher of water. I mixed that in the garden, just poured it in the soil. And I also did the boiled egg water from the eggs. And it cleared up very quickly. I was highly impressed with how quickly it worked. So yeah, so I hope you guys have learned from this. And maybe one extra note is use gloves. I do not, just because I prefer not to use gloves. But if it makes you feel better, then do that. And also get a big shovel, a wider one, because the skinnier your shovel is, the less work you can do, and then the longer it takes. So thank you guys for watching, and don't forget to check out my other videos.